Esiet sveicināti!
Good morning, dear participants, dear viewers. I'm Mārtiņš Daugulis, and I'm very happy to welcome you in the online forum Infodēmijas challenges, how we can fight it. This forum is the final event of the 2021 Media Ethics Month. And today we have a, so to say, circular composition, because when we opened this month, we learned about the nature and challenges of infodemics. We understood what it is. And today we will speak about solutions and how international experience can help us and how Latvia looks in the international context. The entire month was spent on solving issues related how media can continue to exist during the pandemics, how the society should continue to exist, and how we can live in a better society. Today we will have a very intensive day. We will have reports on two studies concerning infodemics and challenges and solutions. Also, we will have quite a provocative discussion, and we invite your contributions as well. And during the panel discussion, we will speak about the following issue: whether we can come up with a vaccine against infodemics and whether it can help us. And during the discussion, we'll speak about two directions. First, whether we have to accept the new normal in the media world in the pandemic's context, or whether we need some very active measures and activities to fight these challenges. And for the first time, this forum has attracted international attention and we are translated and streamed in the international arena. And also various professional researchers, media representatives, NGOs, representatives from state and public organizations, students and stakeholders have applied for participation, and we are streamed in various platforms. And irrespective of the platform, you can always ask your questions, provide your comments, including during the panel discussion. And for each section, we have a separate moderator who will deliver your questions to our studio for us to ask these questions to the participants. This event is supported by the Ministry of Culture. This is a traditional annual event, and we discuss self-regulation, ethics of media, latest solutions and experiences in this area. And to continue with the material part of this event, I would like to give the floor to the President of the Republic of Latvia, Egils Levits.
Distinguished conference participants, in the 20th century, in the heyday of traditional media, these media were called gatekeepers. The selection, evaluation and selection of the journalist and editor was important to sift the valuable from the insignificant. Media of different ideologies attracted mass audiences, creating the dialogue necessary for democracy on issues that are important to the society as a whole. Today, high-quality media journalists and editors continue to play their role as gatekeepers, providing reliable news and diverse views so that there might be a coherent conversation with the public of what is important for them. We need proven facts about what is important for society, truth on the basis of which we can form our own opinions. But now journalistic work for the benefit of a democratic society is performed in a single information space with the social media. And instead of the editor, we have an artificial intelligence algorithm which aims at attracting attention, accumulating data, and earning money by selling it. The more sensational information, the more clicks, and the more money. The original promise of the Internet as a site for the free exchange of ideas is being thwarted by aggression, misinformation, conspiracy theories, division and alienation. Therefore, despite the decline in quality media worldwide, and especially in the small markets, with the small media markets, their importance has increased. And this is clearly visible in this time of infodemia, which threatens people's minds at the same time as the pandemic. Last year, at the initiative of Latvia, 130 United Nations member states signed a declaration expressing their determination to combat this infodemia. This year, the United Nations adopted a United Nations resolution prepared and promoted by Latvia, which aims to support critical thinking, responsible journalism, and to combat misinformation. This is the first United Nations resolution to address the challenges of the information environment. This is an important foreign policy initiative of Latvia, so it would be logical if our steps domestically would serve for improving the overall quality as a model for others. In this respect, there's a lot of work for journalists and also for the government and the SAIMA, and also an important institution like the Latvian Media Ethics Council. In addition to the important work the journalists have done to combat COVID misinformation and conspiracy theories in both commercial or public media, there is also a lot of distorted or false information, superficial argumentation, and I would like to draw your attention to the many mistakes in the Latvian language that we also see. The SAIM and the government must also take partial responsibility. So far, they have mostly watched as the media market has grown weaker year by year and Latvian information space is depleting. Aware of the difficult situation in the Latvian media, a month ago, I called on the SAIMA and the Cabinet of Ministers to develop a more detailed policy in support of the quality, diversity, and pluralism of commercial media by adopting an appropriate law and creating stable financial support for quality commercial media. Such a state aid policy, together with the norms contained in the new law on public media, would improve the quality of the media. In the opinion addressed to the SAIMA and the government, I emphasized the importance of the Latvian Media Ethics Council. Your institutional role is to maintain the standard, the same standard that existed decades ago that distinguished honest journalism from nonsense and deliberate lies. In that sense, you could be called the gatekeepers of professional and ethical journalism. That is why I want the Council's opinion to become visible and audible in the public space. I call on you to become more proactive, not only responding to complaints, but also encouraging discussions on ethical issues, on ethical violations, and making your analysis more powerful from a legal point of view. Dear attendees, I wish you intense discussions, fruitful findings, and fresh ideas at today's conference, which are going to serve the quality of the Latvian information space. Thank you very much. We thank our President, Mr. Levits, for his good words, and also we have some words here from Nauris Punduls from the Ministry of Culture. Hello, dear forum members and spectators. For the second year in a row, the Latvian Media Ethics Council has been implementing a number of measures for strengthening critical thinking regarding media content and promoting media responsibility within the framework of a cooperation agreement. The activities implemented by the Latvian Media Ethics Council are part of this important Latvian media policy, which has created significant challenges for media players and media content, both for consumers and for the actors of media. The theme of this year's Media Ethics Month is connected with the spread of the information epidemic, or we call it infodemia, also very clearly marking the complexity of the field of media policy. We see that there are more people in the media, and that we are able to reach out to a significant audience, which includes both media professionals and consumers. This leads to two important conclusions. Firstly, the media audience and the media themselves care about their quality and accountability. And secondly, the direction of media policy to promote media ethics has lived up to expectations. At the same time, it must be said that the work on educating the media and the audience on ethical issues is by no means exhausted, but we have a basis to work on, to go on with our work. With the evolution of media formats, public opinion trends, and public relations in general, media ethics are taking on new forms, which is more important today than ever before. I wish you a productive work day as the Media Ethics Month is closing down, and I invite, coming to a close, and I invite everyone not only to watch the event, but also to actively use the opportunity to express your views, ask questions, and as well as encourage research into future experiments. We thank Mr. Pontulis for his words and also his wishing statements. And now we would like to give the floor to the host from the Media Ethics Council, Jānis Lielpēters. Hello, dear conference viewers, those who look at us both in English and in Latvian, who watch it in English and Latvian. This is indeed the first time that we step over the borders of the Latvian language. This is the second event in the Media Ethics Month, and we are going on to speak about important issues about media, and we are looking at the infodemia problem. As Martins mentioned, as he opened the event, indeed we have done a full circle, or we're doing a full circle, about when and where the problem has emerged and how to resolve it. I have to say that compared to the previous addresses, mine is going to be shorter and more technical, and I will remind you about what is the Media Ethics Council of Latvia. This association has been founded in 2018 as about 15 different media companies and associations joined together around a defined goal to promote media ethical practice. And in the end of 2018, we have 15 members, 15 associations. Then today, we have about 33 members. We have also 2 associated members and other organizations that have joined the Media Ethics Code. This means that we have around 50 organizations that practically support our ethical code and work according to the provisions of the code in their everyday life. But if we look at the statistics, I would also like to say that since 2019, we have had also an ethics council that has looked at 34 cases and given their opinion in situations when some people might have been seen as affected, and also on other issues important for the media. And also when we look at the first Media Ethics Month last year, it was surprisingly interesting. We saw that around 25,000 unique users joining the media, and despite the pandemia, this or in a way disrupted the event. We see now that by working online, we can reach out to an audience which is huge. So we are very happy to reach out to more people than we initially expected to. So if we want to, speaking about the content of this event. I can invite you to look into our internet site, in important information in our Media Council site, and there you are going to find all the information about media events. And also, as our previous events invited, and as a moderator, and as our moderator said, I invite you to ask questions if you think it should be developed during the discussion. And also, as Martin said that I was the host, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone who has participated in providing for the content of this media month, and also all those who take part and are ready to take part in the discussion, which is not going to be an easy discussion. And I would also like to thank our President and the Ministry of Culture, who have come with their contribution. 3 or 4 years ago, media issues were not on the agenda of our higher officials as it is now. And thirdly, I would like to thank everyone, all our cooperation partners who have helped these events to happen. And fourth, I would really thank my colleagues from the Ethics Council, Media Ethics Council, who actually have helped us to organize this in the format that we have now. And I really wish you productive and fruitful work. Please be active spectators, ask your questions, and we are going to meet each other in our further media events. Thank you. And now it is time to get down to content, to the educational part of the event. What is important and what is specific for media ethics events, we always not only discuss things, but we also find out new things. And we have traditional research presentations. We traditionally have research presentations, and now we are going to listen to the first one, Challenges for the Media During a Pandemic, News Fatigue, the Effect of Hostile Media, and Misinformation and Deception.
Hello and good morning, dear viewers. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to address you. And I thought for several nights about what I could tell, something that has not been told before, how I can demonstrate that to you, because we all see what takes place currently, but there are specific reasons that determine our lack of success or comparative lack of success in fighting the infodemics and pandemics. And thus, I decided to review several previous studies, maybe add some new data and offer some explanations to the processes that take place in the interaction between the media and the society. Very briefly, this is the structure of my presentation. I will use a study conducted previously called Life with COVID. It included 4 sub-studies, and it will also include 2 master papers where I acted as a supervisor, and one of them will include interviews with opponents of COVID-19 and vaccination, and also there'll be interviews. I will use interviews with aggressive anti-COVID opponents, and I will also discuss why the public is ready to accept, not ready to accept specific information related to COVID. I will also speak about various aspects related to the social identity, and as Martin said, I will try to explain whether we see any effects from hostile media. And I will start with basic information that is based on data provided by my colleagues, not my data, to explain how media did during the pandemics and how they do now. Of course, at the very beginning, there was a huge shock, including in the media industry, because the revenue flow fell dramatically. It was not as dramatic as it was expected, but still a huge hindrance. So what happened? And here I have to rely on a study by my colleague, Professor Crook, on media sources. And we can see that quite well now as well. If something complicated happens, then everyone acts according to their professional routines, including the mass media. And according to Mr. Crook's study, more than 80% of sources are official sources, like government representatives, elected officials. And actually, information about pandemics was provided to us by people who enjoy the least who enjoy or who have the least ratings, the lowest ratings, since the public mostly trust in scientists and doctors and so on, not so much in politicians. If media have an editorial strategy according to which specific political directions are supported without any critical thinking or any critical approach, they tended to spread disinformation, and we have to be quite honest. Initially, it was a part of the political support or lack of support climate, because politicians also fell into specific groups, namely whether disinformation and misinformation of the public is profitable or not profitable, and we can see that still quite well, that there are some politicians that are ready to do whatever it takes to win the elections, and they support very dubious positions with regards to public health. However, some media like TV24 admitted that the information spread by their sources is not in line with public interest, and they learned not only to serve as a channel of information, but also to underline that they do not support specific positions if some of the invited guests try to spread disinformation and spread their disinformation agenda. And that was a positive transformation in specific media. Unfortunately, we did not see that in the case of some Russian media. What is good is that the proportion of good quality fact-checked materials increases. Of course, the best research-based materials are offered by Baltica and Delphi, who just keep monitoring the information. They update the information. They provide answers when many tend to shout that there are no answers, and they also point to various misinformation, to ungrounded facts in what well-known persons say. At the beginning of the pandemics, the government enjoyed the so-called trust honeymoon, because there was a huge credit in this regard given to the government, but unfortunately they had to face the so-called victories paradox, because in the autumn and still now we are not able to adequately assess the situation because we are too arrogant. Namely, we are unable to adequately perceive the reality. At the beginning of the pandemics, media had little information, and they mostly tended to support the government, which is a legitimate role during a crisis, even though maybe the colleagues criticized them, including Sergei Kruks criticized the Media Ethics Council. We invited the media to provide information responsibly by relying on checked facts, verified facts. Later, the media became more critical, like aizliegtais paņēmiens and other media, which was very good because the society had to see what errors had been made during the pandemics. And the media started developing their original agenda by focusing on specific issues. And I think that this approach should continue, namely a clear position should be chosen and to ensure the so-called new objectivity and to tell why media do one or the other thing. Now let us speak about the public, about the society, because without the society, media cannot really function and you cannot really understand the media. The large quantity of news created a new phenomenon which was born less than maybe 10 years ago, the so-called news fatigue. And those the news maybe were of good quality, and those the colleagues did quite well in mass media. Still, a lot of information was provided, and it fatigued the people. And we see that in Latvia as well, and we have to understand that this is one of the media challenges. Let's say whether they follow, whether they observe the ethical principles. Those who do not, they are always a minority, since most do, but in any case, you have to take into account this fatigue and have to understand how to reduce the fatigue, because after fatigue, news avoidance follows, and in Latvia, this phenomenon is quite widespread. In comparison to other countries. In many countries, no such studies have been conducted, but for example, in the UK, the US, we can see that less than 20% avoid news, but in Latvia, it's already a third, and a half occasionally avoids news about COVID. They lose interest in these news, and our people are quite inactive in helping the others to understand, in correcting errors, in pointing to errors, in educating the peers, the friends, acquaintances. They also are not ready to engage in discussion. I will also later speak about the so-called being silent about the truth theory. They are passive with regards to the information space. They tend to avoid instead of being active in this space, in trying to look and find answers. And in this presentation, I will demonstrate this search processes, search for answers to new questions. The good news is that we have a fragmented audience, and the society is divided into two large groups: those who are fatigued, who avoid the news, and those who perceive news as a normal part of their daily lives, who follow the most important news because they give the sense of security, because that is one of the main functions of information, because it gives this sense of security in these very insecure times, these very complicated times, when every day you have to understand how to proceed. I already mentioned this. Our studies consisted of two parts, namely the news perception and the psychological effect of news. And as you see, people mostly are not touched by the news. They doubt the truthfulness of the news. People feel worried, helpless. In particular, if they see very complicated news, and the challenge is to take into account these varied emotional states of mind, various psychological problems. With the permission of the State Chancery, I also used their data with regards to news fatigue. Partially, we cannot compare these news because life with COVID studies and online survey, while the Chancery study used the direct interview method. But you can see that as of the beginning of this year, the number of people who completely agree that they feel fatigued has dramatically increased. So the number of these people is more than 50%, and there are also other answers. But we generally see that people tend to be more and more tired. So the journalists, the media, not only have to follow the news, but also have to find a way to overcome this disinterest, fatigue, lack of trust, and so on. This is a very serious problem that I will try to describe in more detail later. Namely that the truth is not told, but more than a third of the respondents believed that they can plan their life better and they follow the news. But this is not enough, and it really demonstrates how fragmented the audience is. Together with the colleagues, we tried to find answers during our study, and we understood that we can not only judge the people, say, by their education level, let's say, that they understand better. So we decided on to rely on the communication theories, and we used the disease risk as a criterion to understand how the society could react. And when we asked about how the people assess the risk of falling ill, and then we saw the answers, and we offered various options, like slightly worried, very worried, partially worried, and other groups. And judging by these groups, we can see that approximately 10 to 12% of respondents are very worried. These are people who have specific diseases, who are in the risk groups, and 1 in 6 are not worried at all. 2/3 of the society are quite realistic what concerns the risk of falling ill. And according to these criteria, we can assess what will be the attitude towards information, how the people will perceive news, disinformation, and so on. What we can see, those who are not worried, they are not interested in news, they do not discuss the news, they are not looking for information, they don't want to understand, they don't believe in news, they believe that they oppress themselves, their audience, and they believe that there are many more other interesting issues. And what concerns all questions that relate to inability to deal with information, education plays a decisive role. Not the age group, as we like to say in Latvia, you know, that elderly, those do not understand, or the youth, they are not serious enough. No, education is the decisive factor. Also, the income level for blue-collar workers. The higher the perceived risk of falling ill, and I will discuss that in more detail with regards to disinformation, the more people follow the news, the more they look for information, and the more they want to understand. And it is very important, because the more worried they are, the more they are concerned with information, they assess information, sometimes they do not believe the information. And we also see certain fear in the society in this regard that affects the perception of the news. These are the people who are helpless, who feel that they cannot manage their life, that they cannot access various medical services. Maybe their health is poor. Very worried those who are very worried basically fall into two groups that have the most trust in media and the most distrust in media. If people who can adequately assess the risk of falling ill, they also can adequately perceive the information. They have specific interest in media information, and it also means that they observe the security and safety measures, and they have better knowledge of the danger this disease poses, and they lower the risk perception. The more negative they are towards the news, like people, they use natural remedies, like consume garlic, and so this self-deception is characteristic to people who believe that there are too many news, they are tiring them, they are fatiguing them, and it makes them either angry with the amount of news or tired from the news. What concerns disinformation? What takes place in the society in this regard? Before we prepared this survey, we did quite a lot of research in social media about the main narratives, something that everyone already knows. And what we saw, disinformation, if we speak about the group that are not protected, these are people who are open to disinformation. This concerns 1/6 of the society that believe in the strangest, in the weirdest disinformation messages, and 1/3 believes that disinformation spread by all these gobzems. They, let's say, believe that the death statistics is misleading and that this is maintained by the official narrative. The story also includes the fact that the virus doesn't exist, that everyone just lies to us, and this is related to active political activities of specific politicians, and that concerns also other areas. And indirectly, the political representation in media can confirm such messages. And what media do not do here, let's say they interview Mr. Gobzems with a yellow star, who claims that he is a great friend of all the Jews, but where media have to show the context, speak about the messages that this politician cultivates, that he keeps spreading, what messages are at the basis of his political career, starting with this fraudulent story about that emergency that medical emergency service provides incorrect causes of death in the death certificates. This context is not shown in mass media, and this allows, let's say, such person as Mr. Gobzems to construct his messaging and continue spreading various types of disinformation.
This is interesting research together with Santa Mercila from our department. She's a master's degree student. She worked in the project, and we together worked out a structure. We wanted to answer the question, who are the people and why do they spread misinformation? And when we collected all the data and joined it together, we found 9 misinformation groups on the Facebook with different motivation. There were also doctors there who spread misinformation, and nurses, and they were interviewed in order to understand why they are misinforming people, deceiving people, by misrepresenting the consequences of the pandemic. We can see here a number of characteristics. Those who spread misinformation partly are themselves victims of misinformation. They cannot evaluate the danger of the virus, and they simply distrust the government. And these people, they are fighting for this misinformation. If we fight for information and against misinformation, they fight for the right of spreading their information, which is in fact misinformation. They cultivate it, and they think that they do a good job by it, because we all want to be good. And certainly they become more sure because they think there is somebody who is evil and who somehow keeps them away from spreading their information, and that is the media and that is the government. I have pointed out here some fragments that you can read. For instance, we're looking at active people, not people who share. We're going to speak about that later, but people who actually create content that can be shared by others. They are targeting people who look for other information, not the one in official social media. They call it alternative environment. There are, with its own opinion leaders, researchers who spread something that has been already overturned by scientific evidence. And then we're looking at the aims, why people, the purposes, why they post articles on the Facebook. Actually, we don't have a lot of original material in Latvia. It is mostly copied and pasted on Facebook. That is information created in other environments and countries. And by sharing that information, these people, they support each other. They try to create an alternative environment. And I have here quoted these people as they speak out. They want to give their contribution in spreading what they think is correct information. What are these people? They have low media literacy. These are the people, or the same people who don't ever check their information. They don't look into the sources, and they don't check their sources. They just believe them, and for a and their long-standing views are used in order to filter the information that is mostly about a lot of lies being told. So I'm going to fight against it and spread my information, which I think is true and which I think is my purpose in life and my task. And I will fight against those who check their facts. I will harass the journalists because I think that they are the people who somehow are against society, or we see different emotions here as well as in the survey. It's anger, fright, frustration about government. So this is not a fight against the virus and for better life, but for some phantom enemies with the media and the government in the center. One more survey, mostly aggression from the point of view of society. If we look at it from the aggression tool, doesn't grow during the pandemic, even if we think that everyone is angry and irritated. Aggressiveness doesn't really grow. But what can we see? Rezi Rauga has investigated about 23,000 comments on the pandemic. And the main idea was to find whether comments also spread misinformation. And indeed, it is so. That was attitude towards the COVID virus, restrictions and precautions. These were the biggest numbers of comments. Also the Latvian officials and governments, also about society and fellow human beings, also a lot of negative attitude towards the media. The good news is that we didn't have a lot of very violent comments about physical abuse or anything as violent as that. So the working conclusion was that 1/6 of all the comments of the 23,000 contain misinformation, and the main messages are that the public is manipulated with and lied to. Then there is a lot of misleading information and lies. Conspiracy theories are spread. The danger of the virus is denied. And quite few, only 1% of comments in the anti-vax categories. And now I would like to reflect on where we are and why we have so many people that have been deceived and fooled and who do not believe in science. First of all, health matters are quite complicated, and people are not really able to assess them. They rely on their feelings and perceptions, and this is not enough, and it creates more insecurity, actually. We also see, and this is not just a question of fragmented audience, we see that new requirements for media are emerging, and the media are as yet not able to supply them. As Douglas is saying, on the one hand, people want their information to be approved of, agreed on, but on the other hand, they also need new information, they need decisions. And this is also about somehow defending these misinformants, where the society wants to protect people who they think probably are quite honest, but this actually leads to a result which is quite different. We also have these persistent belief effects when people, even when their mistakes have been corrected and when they have been refuted and when the facts are actually checked, they still do not change their views. It is easy to spread news, and especially officials have been important here. And as politicians have been at fault, and people who spread misinformation, politicians who spread misinformation, they somehow try to become leaders in this way. We can also see in the Baltic research and in other research that there are people who are always trying to create an idea that they are the majority. And when people are misled and they find somebody who is also misled, they think they are the majority. And they think that people who give honest information are the minority, which actually is not so if we look into statistics. Trust is a big problem. We also have to understand that trust and credibility permeates all aspects of social life, and it's very important in assuming whether a social institution or something is right or wrong. I'm a little bit trying to collect it all in a nutshell. But what is trust actually? Trust is a feeling that the people will be seen as honest. They will not be checked. And people actually, they create this environment of trust themselves, and also they define what can be trusted or not, because individuals cannot really ascertain of it themselves. Latvia has a very high degree of distrust in politicians, government institutions. This is a question of culture of our society, and this distrust environment has been there for a very long time. Also, we are looking at performance of institutions, whether the performance of institutions has been high quality, how honest they have been, how honestly they have used their opportunities, their potential. And so we see that actually very many authorities have discredited themselves by their past experience. One more, I would like to speak about one other theory, the truth by default theory, that is very important when understanding how people are deceived. This theory says that most people say the truth, even if they spread misinformation, or they are honest when spreading misinformation. Why is it so? People do not believe that they can be lied to in a continuous manner and for a long period. And the people who have been taking decisions for a long time. Also, in the NATO Stratcom theory, they say that mostly people are honest, but some prolific liars can be very successful and effective only because we automatically consider people to be honest. May I have 5 minutes more? Yes. So, what is interesting? What does this theory help us to understand from different data? It helps us to understand that it takes into account self-deception, that the person is very successful in self-deceiving himself, and through believing and trusting liars, people deceive themselves because they don't understand how reality could otherwise function. This is quite complicated, this theory. I'm not going to dwell upon it for longer, but that's one of the ways how we can explain why some people are so concerned, so violent against truth. Why are they so affected, and why do they really keep to the deceptions that why do they have these perceptions that cannot be shaken? So why are people against the vaccine? Those people who a short time ago we're so worried that the vaccine was not there. Why are they against the vaccine that could help us, protect us? One thing is social identity, which is part of their self-identity, and that depends on the group the person is integrated in and how he takes up the information that is important for that group. And the people who find themselves as unable to manage their own lives, they don't trust information anymore, because as they join their group, their social identity does not allow them to assess the information in an adequate way. So they select information according to the identity that they feel themselves to be part of. Other people act quite differently against the information that is offered to them. And where do they get this feeling to which social group you belong? That is possible through the social media. It's not a demographic group, it is rather an opinion group, which is about social reality and how we see it. And originality then is lost, and individual values are not any more important. Certainly, there are still people who can think independently, but these groups that are manifested in different communicational environments can augment social identities. They can define them, and it is exactly through the social identity effect that gives rise to hostile media. People think that media are fatiguing, they are negative, they are creating different negative emotions. In the worst case, they lie against the interests of the public. And this assessment is transferred through a feeling that I am in a different group. I am in a social media that is not supported by the media. And if a person is in a different social group, which is not reached out, which the media has not reached out to, then they see media as hostile. So this means that we need to have more media, more different media, diverse media, because if we don't have them, then information will be seen as hostile and against the people. And this is a big challenge to media. And people will keep avoiding media. News fatigue is going to continue. There are going to be more people who are against news. And then this division phenomenon, which also shows why people spread information that they believe in. People want to be important. They want to make their message important, to construe the topical events and the importance of the topical events. It's a way how they can participate in the political process. We see that the pandemia is politicized through media texts, through media sources, through media ideas, and through self-presentation of politicians. It is seen as self-representation and engaging into politics. And people, like misinformers, want to give something good to the society. And this is something that professional media have to work with. They have to think about forming specific digital communities to which media have had no contact with or no access to. So sometimes people don't even think, and media don't even think about how many decisions they have to take, where professional media should be very important.
And there are very many who share this disinformation, who don't even understand what they are sharing, considering their social identity. Since they identify with a specific group, they share this information thinking that they educate the others. Thank you for being so patient, and I would like to apologize for using too much time, but I had so much to tell, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. We actually have very many questions via many platforms and comments, but I would like to ask one quick question that requires a very quick answer. So if we have these varied social identities, and if each person has one or the other social identity, how we can contribute to this honest discussion between these various worlds? Because you mentioned this honest discussion, but how can you have honest discussion if you sit in your camp? I think the short answer is that it has to be continuous and very detailed, extremely detailed, because every day new messages are created, and professional media should focus on them. And I understand why media do not pay attention to those who spread disinformation, who spread these messages, because they fear multiplying these messages. But if they are not discussed in detail, they will become more and more prevalent, they will become stronger, instead of being dissected in showing that this identity rests on lack of security, on solitude, on whatever. And we already discussed with Carlos that media should change their practices, revamp their practices, and they have to provide quality information in the context of human feelings, in the context of topical events. And the media have to add new columns or new sections in their pages, claiming, today we have this message, and maybe in a week we will only know whether it's true or not, because keeping silent just perpetuates these problems. Thank you to Ms. Roškalne. And the next speaker was already introduced, Carlis Dagilis, media during the Infodēmijas international experience in the Latvian context. And you are invited to send in your questions and comments. Thank you for inviting me. And as a representative of the editorial board, I find it very interesting to look at the international experience, and mostly focused on the society, on those who consume media during the Infodēmijas. I will discuss these issues maybe from the other side of the screen, and will speak about editorial boards. And I believe that it could be quite interesting for the journalists, for those who work in these editorial boards, as well as for the audience, so that they could understand what challenges were faced by media, by journalists during the pandemics. When I was invited to speak about these topics, I started thinking about the pandemics, about the Infodēmijas. I didn't read the definitions, since I do not represent the academic circles. I was thinking about these problems more as a professional who works in this area. So I look at these notions more from the point of view of virus and disinvasion, but like processes that take place during a longer period of time, certain processes take place that change human habits, media habits, and then the pandemics and infodemics can be discussed in this context, and we could adopt a much wider approach. Also, I was offered a short reference that maybe the fight against the infodemics is not the most important thing that we have to do during this pandemics period, since there are other issues that we have to discuss, like how we make decisions, what we write or tell about, how balanced these news are, what opinions we let into the media space, and also how we organize editorial boards, because our physical distancing also changes quite a lot in the media space. So my presentation will focus on these challenges that on the one hand are external challenges, and they could include things like establishing the truth. That is very complicated, since there are many questions about the origins of this virus, also the scope of disinformation. And those researchers claim that the scope of disinformation has dramatically increased, and we see that in our work as well. And we have to spend more and more time on fighting the disinformation, on providing truthful facts, on checking the facts. We could provide news, but instead of that, we have to fight the disinformation. Also, if we speak about government and information, there is a certain interaction, how governmental decisions affect how media act, how journalists present information. And there are specific challenges in this regard as well. This also includes the factors that we faced before, namely threats in the virtual environment, denigrating the journalist, and this has become much more prevalent of late. And if journalists publish specific opinions, sometimes they have to face very strong reactions. As to media, I would also like to speak about internal challenges, namely how editorial boards have changed and what is important in this regard. First and foremost, I think it will be discussed during the panel discussions that we will have later. But I would also like to invite you not to speak only about these technical and financial challenges, like less advertising revenue, the fact that you have to lay off people or cut their wages. But there are also other challenges. First, journalists also may have COVID, they have to self-isolate, or they cannot go on business trips, or they can bring the virus home. This mathematically affects the number of journalists available. Also, mental health makes many meetings of the editorial board, either in person or remotely, much more difficult, because sometimes many times we feel like sitting on the powder barrel. Also, we have to ask how well we can perform our work if we work remotely. Let's say we have children at home, there is a fridge making noise in the background. Also, how we can access information, like many officials use pandemics as a pretense not to provide information. Also, there are journalists who prefer not to get vaccinated, and that can also affect their performance. Maybe we have to also consider this fact in the context of their message in the public space. Also, the balance between various opinions, to what extent we allow these opposing opinions in the media space. Sometimes these opinions are not really based on scientific facts. Also, to what extent we should tell about anti-vaccination protests and so on. These are the questions that we discuss in editorial boards. Also, what praise do we have to pray for errors, and to what extent we self-censor ourselves. and already mentioned one specific example. I think the media responsibility in this during this pandemics is really important, and sometimes journalists shy away from publishing specific materials because they face specific risks. On the other hand, if they release these materials, they may make errors, and there is a certain price that they have to pay for these errors. And this is what I would like to discuss during my presentation. And if I have time at the end, I would also like to claim that all crises give us an opportunity to change, to increase productivity, to cut costs, to proceed with digital transformation. That becomes faster and faster. Journalists learn about new information collection methods, and there are also structural changes. Maybe we can reorganize our editorial boards, and we can also become closer to society and our audiences. This is a new trend, because generally, I believe the trust in media has increased. We are not in the editorial boards anymore. We have to work outside of these boards. This allows us to go out of these closed spaces and maybe organize our meetings in public spaces where other people can also participate. My report is mostly based on the survey conducted by the International Journalism Center. It was done in 2020. Journalists from many countries were surveyed, and they answered various questions on challenges in mass media. The study is quite representative. Maybe today the results could slightly differ, but I think that they are still quite relevant. So one of the external challenges that I already mentioned at the beginning is as follows, namely how to establish the truth, how to find the truth, because that is the ultimate task of journalists. But the problem is that the virus started spreading in China, and China is not the most open of countries. It's difficult to access information. There's a lot of censorship in social media and local networks. And this information vacuum eventually ends results in various speculations, and journalists cannot really do much. Also, public opinion leaders, politicians are forced to admit that we also have to investigate this version, namely that the virus could have spread from a specific laboratory. At the beginning, it seemed like a real conspiracy theory, but now it is a valid version. And we return to this problem, and there is still doubt in the society, and it seems that we will not be able to find the answer to this question quickly, considering the official policy of the China. Namely, they don't provide official information. For example, yesterday, it was published that the scientists will not be able to really study the original facts. The next challenge is disinformation, the scope of disinformation. It has increased of late, and journalists see that in their practice. Also, statistical data confirms this. Of late, it was established, there was a study according to which it was established that 12 people are behind 60% of disinformation in the world. So basically, a very small group of people run the show, but there is a lot of this disinformation, and journalists have to fight it. From the point of view of Latvian radio, we invest more effort in fighting the disinformation. We used to cooperate with Baltic recheck once per 2 weeks, and now we do that once per week, which is 2 times more often. And what I already mentioned, journalists instead of writing about people's stories, mentioned by Skaidrīta Lastmane during the previous conference, let's say, how we speak about death, because there are people behind any death. But these resources are now limited because we have to fight disinformation. And if we look at those who spread disinformation, you know, we used to be able to tell that these are the evil forces, propaganda workers or whatever, or let's say geopolitical forces supporting specific geopolitical interests. But no, disinformation is mostly spread even by officials. That we recently saw in one of our shows 2 or 3 days ago. One of the opposition politicians spoke about side effects of vaccines, and he eventually admitted that it was a slip of the lip, but the initial message was that 1 in 1,000 becomes completely paralyzed after vaccination. That sounds quite scaring. But we have to do what we have to do, and we have to, and if we have to fight this, we can spend less time on something else. Also, what is quite interesting during this age is that we return to the traditional, opportunities, because disinformation doesn't live only in the virtual space, like in Twitter or Facebook or wherever, where you share, like, and do things. Now it happens also by regular mail. Like in the UK, there is a newspaper called Light that is put in your mailboxes. They claim that they are the newspaper, the truth, the newspaper of the truth. So these trends generally are quite new, quite recent, and the scope and the cover of the disinformation just keeps increasing instead of decreasing. And in this regard, one of the ideas that I had before this conference is that I believe one of the solutions in the disinformation context is not to fight it, because it's like fighting the unfightable. It's like the pandemics. We do not have to fight it. We have to coexist with it. It's clear that we will not be able to vaccinate everyone, and this virus will be here forever. For maybe 5 to 10 years or longer. So it's clear that we will not be able to come up with a vaccine that will solve the disinformation problem. Of course, Facebook and Twitter can do more and fight these 12 most prolific spreaders of disinformation, but we will never be able to reach the ground zero. The third most important external challenge is government and information. How the interaction takes place in this area. Anda already mentioned the Latvian scenario, that this huge trust ratings that this gave the moral authority to the government to fight, to act quickly, and so on. But if we look at what took place later, then I think we can speak about 2 extremes. There are specific officials who want to fight. Let's say in Hungary, what they do with information. Last year, they adopted a law that does not allow to publish fake news with regards to COVID-19, and many critics indicated that this was just a pretense to fight the mass media as such, to fight unwelcome opinions, to silence the critics. So the government oppresses mass media, and of course this affects what the editorial boards do. The second extreme is Brazil, where the president is very active in denying COVID-19 as such and the spread of the virus. And we also see the negative effects here, what concerns mass media. Mass media mass media are oppressed since they invite to fight against the coronavirus, since they report about vaccines and so on. So the government and their effects on the information space should be assessed critically from both points of view. And there are very many examples here also from other countries where there are specific traditions in specific regions how to oppress the mass media, like imprisoning the journalists or physically persecuting them or closing the media or fining the media with huge fines. This is a new trend, and we really have to take that into account globally.
And the last external challenge, which comes from the society, perhaps, is what Anda mentioned, perhaps, that ensues from hostility, that people have to vent out their emotions. They want to be important. They want to share the messages that they think important. They have all this emotion. They want to blame somebody, why we cannot go out, why we cannot do things. Of course, that is the government, but there are maybe others. So, and if the media message is similar to the governmental message, then it is very easy to blame the media as well, together with the government. And then we have all this harassment and threats against journalists that is growing. The internal challenges that I mentioned in the introduction, one thing is the economic pressure, also the journalists who understand the situation in the media. They understand that this economic kick or the economic threat or the economic problems have really been huge. This means, of course, the thwarting of them or less money from advertising. And the solutions that were offered by the government, the European Journalist Federation has collected information about the 5 past months about what support there has been from the government. Also in Latvia, we had some safety pillows. There was some benefits on VAT. That was not just for the media, but also for individual journalists, the freelancers, and also to media space in the long term. We should like to understand whether there is going to be any support. I think we have had 1 or 2 support packages, but the question is how long this will be available. So the economic pressure in the European zone has probably been less painful than other places. Our media are still alive and working, and journalists, of course, as well. But I think that you are going to discuss about this in the next part. The next internal challenges is also safety of journalists during the pandemic, how much we have protected journalists and how much journalists have protected themselves. Journalists say that they have not felt protected enough, and the disease risk has been quite big. Mostly, one of the mostly affected countries was countries where in South America, where in Peru and Brazil are the leaders in journalistic fatalities. And in Brazil, there is even a symbolic cemetery for the journalists who have died during the pandemic. This is also about government interaction, that there is no single strategy to protect the part of the society who have to go out from their homes or from the office to work with their microphone. We have another section here about what journalists themselves have reported about the risks. The tension, stress, and emotion that dominates in offices and publishing houses. What do the journalists report having experienced during this time? Fatigue, burnout, sleep problems, dark and depressive thoughts, a feeling of frustration. These are the main things that they have mentioned. And that, of course, affects their work. It affects the work, how publishing houses work. And one of the recommendations from international experts is that the leaders on the editorial boards and the publishing houses have to be probably softer, more emphatic. They should not demand journalists to come to work at a certain time and work for so and so many hours. They have to be more understanding. They have to understand that workers are really suffering in these conditions, and new solutions have to be sought so the journalists could cope with the situation. It is also indicated that the assistance in order to improve mental health has to be sufficient. This has been indicated by 62% of the respondents. Another internal challenge is remote work. This is actually from 2017, and it is not related to the pandemic. But I would like to illustrate this challenge of modern journalism when you have to work from home and when there are lots of elements that disrupt work, the children, the refrigerator, the sofa. There are, of course, also games. You don't have anyone to control you. You can go out and have a breath of fresh air. You can structure your own work. You can choose the best ways to work, but that is only good for those who are self-organizers, who are good organizers of their daily routines. But this also affects relations in the family and also work quality. We don't allow so much attention to certain things, also to work, and so and quality can suffer. Another thing that affects, and this could be also an external factor, but when we work externally, or when we work remotely, how do we work with information sources? And we see that the information sources are less, are more afraid to speak out. They are afraid to lose their jobs. They don't want to speak out. They don't want their identities to be revealed. And this is also something that hinders the work of a journalist. As regards access to information, the trends that have grown, is reliance to official sources of information. And somebody, the society, as we saw, doesn't trust it. After the first wave, we had high trust, but then it fell, and we still use the same sources. We still interview the same officials. We still use them as the sources, and this actually doesn't improve the credit of information, or it actually disrupts trust. And if we see that actually the public trust in media is in a way statistically growing. We see these figures. If we speak about what affects the work of the journalism, then very frequently journalists say that they are not able to give information during the pandemic. They cannot meet with people face to face. They are not accredited. They are excluded from press conferences. These are different reasons the journalists give for as of being unable to give truthful information. This has grown during the pandemic. But another thing that is really disturbing for the editorial boards of media is how to reflect the opposite side, how to raise our professional standards, how much we speak about protests, how much we give the floor to the opposite party, or how much we simply avoid them, that they are going to give a lot of misinformation on our media, and that we will have to refute this information, and we shall be seen as co-responsible for this information. This is very important. I think that we can make parallels here with climate change. Probably we have not been spoken as much about climate change is reflected in the media, and how we give the floor to the opponents, to those who deny climate change, and the scientific opinions on that, and the consensus that we have in the scientific world that climate changes do take place, and that they are partly man-made, man-caused. This is a question how we work with this part, with our opposition, with the part of the society which is opposed against the official view, how we probably should stigmatize them less. This is what Skaidrita Lasman also mentioned. This is an important thing. From the Public Media Alliance, we have a quote that we need some balance between being critical and being responsible in journalism. And speaking about and reporting about vaccines, what Anda mentioned, the new rubrics that we need. We had the vaccine rubric in our news department where people could ask questions and we gave answers. We stopped it because the program How to Live Better started doing it regularly, and there were interviews lasting every time for an hour when experts were interviewed and question and answer sessions were taking place. So this is very important to have sufficient balance between criticism and responsibility, also when we speak about vaccines. And to finalize my report, we have a lot of good news. Also, following from this survey, journalists become more engaged and into their profession. In their profession, they feel more as part of their profession, and they also interact better with the audiences. And trust has been growing. Trust media has been growing. And the feedback from the public has been bigger. This also is shown in the survey. This data is from 2020, from the first year of the pandemic, but I specifically checked on this trust, and I think that trust to media has grown in many countries, also in France and in other places. That is shown by the survey data. And if we should look in our publishing houses, we also see that public trust has really grown in media. We see it also from radio ratings and TV ratings. People do need information. People go and read it in trusted sources. And the media task, the task of the media is to maintain this trust. But of course, we should think about costs, digital transformation. We have to think about how to collect data in other ways so that we would be faster. Like we have remote education now in the schooling system. We see that we should introduce things like that also in the media. Also structural changes, reaching out to the audiences, which is an American example of local newspapers who actually sell their premises and hold their editorial board meetings in public spaces like in the libraries and other things. So this is what I wanted to tell you. I think I am within my time limits. Yes, thank you, Carlos Douglas. And we would like to have the discussion. We already have a parallel discussion. And with the help of the moderator, I would like you, as the moderator, I would like you to help to comment on how the regional media are doing. Also, we spoke about local government editions that are now distorting competition. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Bauskas Zīve, in a local newspaper, and I understand that the editors had acquired some financing, and they were talking about media literacy. And it was a very good event where the editorial board and the journalists were actually talking to their readers. And there were different people in the audience. There were people who accepted everything, and there were people also who were critical. It was a good way to talk. Perhaps the tone was a bit aggressive at the start, but when you talk to people, it is much easier to understand them, why they are looking for information in other places. And there is a good link there to what Anders said about wanting to be important in this difficult time, to do something unique and not just to join the one voice that there supposedly should be or is. to speak in one voice. So it is better not to just agree to the information that is given, but to find out more about it. It's human empathy, and the media should also work together to reach this empathy. Yes, this is experience, and what we are going to gain as media from this pandemic is going to be a lot, and we are going to be able to understand how much we need the technicalities, how much we need space, whether we do need so much space to work in, I mean physical space, buildings, or whether we have also different ways of working together. And I think that also officials will think more about to strengthen content.
Thank you, Carlos, for his presentation and opening many questions for our discussion panel. Now we will have a short technical break, namely 15 minutes, and then we will have a panel discussion about vaccine against the infodemics. Thank you. Good morning, dear audience. We are back after a technical break. I hope that you enjoyed this break, and now we'll continue with a panel discussion that has quite a provocative title. Is there a vaccine against infodemics? And whether it can be used to solve this problem. Now we live in the age when there is a distinct dissonance what concerns vaccination and the role of media in this discourse, the self-regulation. These are the matters that we will discuss during our panel discussion. Our panelists and their background means that we will have quite a serious discussion, since we have media professionals who are very experienced, who have their opinions and visions. So I will have Solvita Denis Liepniece, who is from Vidzeme University of Applied Sciences, who is also a researcher at Yale University and who has focused on media literacy issues and has worked as a journalist for 15 years. Also, Juris Menziņš, the head of news agency Leta, has been in the media business for many years and is quite active in providing his opinion about various events in the public space. Aivars Pastāvnieks, editor-in-chief of magazine Club, and has also been a journalist for at least 3 decades, and Gunta Līdaka, media expert, has been elected to the NELP for several terms and quite active in the journalism field. And while we have this forum, there is a separate discussion in the various forums where we stream our proceedings. So the first question is what we media can do, what we can undertake to do. This is a sort of self-regulation question. I believe that all of you remember the political force that had a slogan that you have to start with yourself. So if media had to start with themselves, what should they do? So maybe Solvita, you could be the first. I don't think I can identify myself being as a part of media, and I would like to apologize for that, but and I would like to apologize to those members of the audience who actively sent in their comments and were and who are always blamed for not thinking critically, or they do not choose the right media, and they don't believe those who should be believed, and so on. The COVID pandemic is a new problem. The word infodemics is something new since 2019. You, the audience, you are not guilty for being professionals, professional experts like dentists, tram drivers, or whatever. And now I'm speaking about academia. We had some studies, but I think we were not really heard to the extent that we should have been heard by the politicians. I think we indicated in our studies, and we also heard some of these speakers during the first part of this event. They have outstanding studies, and they reiterate various conclusions that have already been before. Maybe we're not loud enough, or we were not able to approach correctly, or maybe we didn't do what we had to do. And now, of course, then there's a question what we should do, whether we should find solutions now. Of course, other panelists will also answer your question, but I believe that the main thing is to understand, and we cannot really blame these people who cannot tell a difference between conventional thinking and conspiratory thinking, so we cannot blame them. panelists. If you don't agree to other panelists, of course, you can always say so. Yuri, now the floor goes to you. I will start with a similarity. Some time ago, I participated in an online conference during which a Russian psychologist spoke about various types of abuse problems, and he claims that abuse usually starts where people miss something, because you are healthy when you consume normal food, whether you don't have abnormal challenges at work, if you are physically active, if everything is fine at home. And if your life is, let's say, filled with good things, and then you don't need these addictions. And I believe that infodemics is quite similar. These needs for alternative sources of content and opinions probably come into being because official or regular media agenda doesn't tell everything 100%. And that's why in my application I indicated that the main and most important tool that we can use against infodemics is honest, fair, and 100% truthful communication. And if this information that we believe in is received by media, then media has to convey it to the consumer. If the consumer in this game receives everything that he or she is interested in, and I can also provide some examples later, then this infodemics and disinformation will have no space in our discourse, at least to the extent as it does nowadays. So there is some deficit, I believe. I can explain by examples later, maybe in a few minutes. Now the floor goes to Aivars. From media point of view, I'll tell about myself. Of late, I say, don't denigrate, don't express negative opinions about people who are not vaccinated. You have to understand them. We really have to ask ourselves whether we are the leaders of irresponsibility. And I think in the July club, Stratcom head Jānis Sārts provided a good answer, who claimed that anti-vaccination campaigns are mostly a phenomenon spread in the developed countries. He showed some sources that confirm this theory, but I decided to test this idea by speaking with colleagues who live abroad. They do not really agree with this idea. Yes, they have anti-vaccination campaigns, but they are not very widespread. According to the information sent by colleagues, in Sweden, let's say 91%, in other countries slightly less, claims that they will be ready to vaccinate. In Latvia, it's, I think, a bit more than 50, and I think that's the problem. In Sweden, for example, anti-vaccination campaigns can reach 9% of people, in Germany 18%, in our case more than 40%. And I try to understand who these 40% are, and I don't have any data. But in my circle of acquaintances and friends, I can speak about 4 groups. First, those who are so concerned with their immunity, they think that their immunity is top-notch, it's better than anyone else's. The next is those who believe, those who are very religious. In WhatsApp, I receive various news from religious acquaintances, and I feel Russian influence there. For example, in Catholic congregations, like consume some natural remedies and don't get vaccinated. And then, of course, there's the largest group who just wait. They wait before they make a decision to vaccinate. And I think that this group is not approached as we should approach them. And in my practice, I have worked with this group mostly to understand why they believe in what they believe. The floor now goes to Gunta Līdaka. I would like to look at this phenomenon from the point of view of media, namely the infodemics or communication crisis. I think the most important matter is trusting someone or something. Previous speakers already mentioned public trust in media, public opinion makers, and so on. And here's this link that we should take into account. We have to take a critical approach to media communication with the society. And I believe the most important here is how during the first wave that we had, media blindly followed the government, thus they lost the public trust, because these messages were not always 100% truthful, understandable. Thus, the public started doubting the trustworthiness of media in general, and Anda spoke quite a lot about the COVID study. But she didn't mention one important aspect that we already spoke about during our TV show. And namely that during this crisis, the society believed that the journalists were the greatest spreaders of disinformation. And here I disagree with Carlos, who claimed that the trust in conventional media has increased, has improved. So we have to ask, what are the reasons why there is no public trust? And I believe that this was because of the cooperation with the politicians. And the irresponsible messages of politicians were reflected by the journalists and spread by the journalists, and eventually the lack of trust affected not the sources of these messages, but those who spread these messages, namely journalists. And I would also like to underline that at this time, journalists have to really ask ourselves how critical they are in relation to politics, how politics affects trust in media. This mission that the President spoke, this gatekeeping mission, to what extent we really are gatekeepers, whether we are on one or the other side of the gates. And this crisis really demonstrated that for a long period of time, media were on the side of the government. On the government side of the gates, and that was the problem that resulted in lack of trust. And now we have to think how to return this trust, how to reinstate this trust to the conventional, traditional media, who try to do as good as they can. Of course, at the beginning, many didn't know what to convey, but this critical attitude towards the messaging is very important. Juris showed some very active body language signs during what Gunta said. Maybe you can speak about this link between politicians and media during the pandemics. I'm slightly concerned by the approach of Gunta. Of course, media have to be watchdogs, they have to be critical towards the politicians as well. But now we have ended up with that source of, or that cause of our lack of trust in politics. This public trust is very low, and it has become even lower. So why does the government not tell us everything? And if there are these holes in the information tapestry, then we fill them with various theories. I would like to offer some examples. Maybe they'll be quite provocative and stir discussions, but this is my purpose. We all know that in March, Denmark gave up AstraZeneca, and I was really interested in looking at the governmental communication. So we have two topical information verticalities, two things that we were interested in what concerns vaccines, whether they are available and how safe the vaccines are. If the answer to the second question is definitely yes, then vaccination problem is solved. We know that Denmark stopped administering these vaccines, and Denmark was followed by other countries. But we know that the Latvian Agency of Medicines, a few days after this discontinuation, claimed that they suspend the use of this vaccine for some period of time, but at the same time, the then Minister of Medicine indicated that finally I can go to Denmark to pick up these vaccines. But did he say that the vaccines are safe? Did he explain why Denmark gave up these vaccines? Did they convey the message that everything is fine, that they take the responsibility? Also, the person who delivered this information, Mr. Henkusen, I think this was quite a formal message provided by a bureaucrat. You know, we face this problem in the European Union, and we all know that he was demoted less than a month later, in May, for 3 years. So is he really the best person to communicate these messages? Maybe they could invite some professionals who could allow to communicate as it should have been. So inability of the government to properly communicate contributed to the problem. Okay, if we leave aside vaccination, in July a new taxation framework took force. Our president indicated that this framework is not really as it should be. And recently our Prime Minister spoke on TV, who claims that he doesn't have any information that something is wrong with the framework, and if someone says that people protest this framework in social media, then you cannot really believe in social media because they don't represent the majority. The Latvian Association of Press Publishers, Association of Hoteliers, Confederation of Employers, Trade and Industry Chamber, all of them wrote a letter against these changes. And Mr. Kariņš still doesn't know that something is wrong. Is it really the best strategy to just pretend that the problem doesn't exist? Does it really contribute to trust in the captain during a storm? So the question is open. I once listened to a very conservative lecturer who said, you know, the governments always lie and the taxes are always increased. Of course, we can discuss about this, we can speak about this statement. So the government is unable to communicate about the tax reform. They cannot really perform well communication-wise during the pandemics. What media can do in this situation? How can they improve the situation? Of course, media can help, but there's several preconditions exist. First, editorial independence, ability to make critical decisions, create strong investigative journalistic services who really review messages before they are spread in the society, because as journalists we don't check the messaging of government, we don't check the truthfulness of government messages. And I believe that the only reason is that our investigative journalism is very weak. Yes, of course, there was the shock that was faced when we realized that we reported everything that the government said without any critical approach. And when the previous minister lost her position, we realized that we cannot really trust everything that the government says, and the public was confused. And then I believe the media started restructuring and adopted a much more critical approach to governmental messages. But I think that is inadequate just for the reasons that the investigative journalism is very weak in Latvia. The second reason, and here I would like to speak about the Media Foundation. When mass financing was allocated to various media to write or show about COVID crisis, it was not really clear what we should include in our shows or publications or whatever. And then, to a certain extent, we self-censored ourselves and we conveyed the official messages. And we should have had a provision in these criteria that we adopt a critical approach to whatever takes place, that we analyze various events, that maybe we should have listened to the third, fourth, and fifth opinion. We are not like propaganda makers who just convey whatever we are told to convey. That was the mistake, when we understood that we do not convey the entire truth. Quite often, those who hold the power didn't know the answers, but they could not admit that they do not know the answers. And instead of admitting this, they just kept speaking, kept proceeding, and that also contributed to the lack of trust. And there is another problem, which is quite serious. Quite often, media think that they know better what the public expects of them, and they don't really ask the public what they expect. And I think that is related, of course, to the public opinion studies, to a lot of research and analysis of public opinions during crisis. And it is very good that we had these studies. But what media should convey, what the public expects from media, I don't think we have answers to these questions.
Solvita has an academic view on what the colleagues are speaking. I will speak from a very everyday point of view. I've been living in the United States, in New York, and at the beginning of the pandemic, New York was the COVID capital. So we have been discussing a lot about the interaction of authorities and journalists. There was an election during the pandemic. The administration changed. Trump went around without the face mask. Then Biden came. There was a different relationship was set up with the World Health Organization. So we see that communication also was changing there. The relationship between authority and media is different at different times. So maybe we should zoom out from Latvia and look at what is happening in the world. Also, your example where we are and where we see Latvia at this time. So perhaps we shall not, we shall find the problems that we are not going to resolve because they are topical in every and each place, and we are only one of the countries that are affected by this problem and that face this problem, and we can take some experience over and use their research, see what works and what doesn't work here. Nobody is going to be able to understand our society, our community, instead of us. And even if you did already listen to 2 lectures, I would like to speak about social anthropology from my point of view. Social anthropology is very important. It is about how people develop, how groups of people develop, and how the community develops. At a time when we didn't communicate, but when people groups lived separately, evolutionary development was very similar. So how can we use the information of social anthropology as we are facing the pandemic. Threats are very important to us when we think of ourselves as a group. Earlier, we spoke about threats, external threats like tigers that we have to withstand and we had to keep together not to be attacked. In order to live in a group and to evolutionize together with the group, we need to have a smaller group than a bigger group and in a country. And the most important thing is that information about threat is very important. And gossip spreads very fast. And the French anthropologist is looking at communication and what we can take from our evolutionary process. Thinks that we don't really know what we are like and how our brain thinks. Perhaps we wouldn't like to see ourselves as bees trying to find some honey, but also bees have a role to play in the society, and that we are much more fast in acting against threats is quite clear, because our brain also developed in evolutionary way. And I think that what we didn't really hear was sustainability and resilience, and how this resilience should be developed. When we speak about gossip, this means that we speak about a domain where there has to be some protection. And the newest trends that we see in the structures that you mentioned already relating to NATO and in the research centers, we are now in entered a new dimension, which is called the cognitive dimension, and this will serve us for a long time. And we're not speaking just about pandemic, but in the cognitive dimension shows how tools should be developed to influence society. And this is where we have to work ourselves. This means that we have to understand ourselves better. I would like to go back to what Juris said. If the communication with the government was bad, did it mean that the journalists really did a poor job? I think this is what Juris said and also what Gunther said, because Gunther said the ambassadors are those who get the kick. And since the government was poorly reacting, then the ambassadors, the journalists, also gave the kick. I think that what we have really, what we're seeing now is that all the discussion moves into Facebook, and Facebook becomes the greatest evil. I read data about anti-vaxxer movements, and 31 million people follow them. And the Facebook doesn't really work with that issue at all. This is the niche. I want to say about user experience. I think that the people around me really believe in conventional media, but they don't really understand what these conventional media are, because Twitter and Facebook has a lot of echo in the media. This is not a question about conventional media. It is a question rather about trusted information sources. How to form these islands of trust that the public believes in, because public is very different. They're emotionally different. They have different education. They are different in age. We can segment it in whatever segments we want to, and we will see a lot of islands where people live. And it is important for these islands to have trusted sources that the public would trust, and also that feel empathy towards the public, because we need to keep this empathy to those that we are talking to. We can't just talk into the void and think that the public has to accept our opinion. Media has a lot of challenges today because we're never going to have one ideal media. We're going to have many islands of trust. If somebody reads clubs, the men read clubs and they trust pastāvnieks, and there are other people who sit in digital media and read about who has married whom and different things, and they trust a different source. The question is how to talk to the public. It is becoming more and more difficult, and I would like to return to research in public expectations and wishes, and this is really this too ambitious attitude from our media, the condescending attitude of our media, that we think that we know better, but in actual fact, we need to have a dialogue with the community. I would like to be a bit provocative, and I've been reading his book of history, and I'm now thinking about wars and different things like that. So do you think that the more we speak, the more better we are going to do it, and at the end they will believe us? Now, certainly, if we want something to happen in life, we want the public to get vaccinated or to reach a goal, of course we need an agreement. An agreement. Only through having an agreement among ourselves, we're going to get to a goal. But of course, you might have no consensus. You might just kill your opponents or oppress them. Yes, and this is why the crisis is so deep. I would like to speak a little bit more about trust in media from a business point of view. And now I'm going to zoom out a bit. And for a long time, I would say for a decade or a decade and a half, we've been living in the media environment where whatever standards we would have, the click wins, the money wins. And this means that the editorial board should somehow be modulated somehow, or to have some is somehow directed or modulated to more returns from the audience. I remember a time when we had the paper D, and they didn't really sell clicks, they clicked reputation. And if you really subscribed to this paper in January, you were more or less sure that by summer they are going to publish also reputable news. And at this moment, we also sometimes, when we buy magazines, we buy the cover, we buy reputation. And speaking about misinformation campaigns, I think that Google, Facebook, and YouTube have done a good thing because they are cannibalizing the advertising market, and the content actually and the money flows, and also the content flows to these big providers, and then they found a solution in the form of a paywall, which means if you want to subscribe to Delphi, plus you want to read good content, you have to buy it. And this means that they have to work not just on clicks, but on reputations. So they are shifting from the click reputation to the reputation territory. But the reputation territory has different rules. You can't mislead your audience. You cannot be fraudulent to your audience. You cannot. You have to live up to its expectations. And these things, they actually create these islands of trust. We're speaking about zoom out. It's not just about Latvia. It's also about Sweden and Norway and Denmark. And they also have introduced the paywall. And this orientation towards the clicks is reduced. Do you think that the audience is reacting to it? Do you know what the readers think about paywalls? At the beginning of this introduction, I said I was looking at all this from a business point of view. Certainly, readers are not happy if they have to pay something, but you can look at the cost-effectiveness of Delphi in 2020 and during the pandemic, and before that now, Delphi is in a better situation, and we can see it. This is after the paywall. I have a feeling, but I think that Facebook is the main player now. They have an anti-vaxxer platform, and it has created billions of dollars of pay for them. From Latvia, over the 2 and 3 years, we have a lot of people who've joined the Facebook. And then if somebody, a repairman is coming into an apartment, he's saying, are you vaccinated or not? And if the other person is not vaccinated, he thinks that he's saying that the apartment owner would be dead in 2 years if he didn't vaccinate. So this repairman who has come to our apartment and has been saying that has probably found it out on the Facebook or in Britain, where he has lived for a couple of years. And how can we fight against it? If there are people who voice their misinformation on the Facebook and nobody actually responds to it, nobody tries to refute all this information. I think that Facebook is the bigger earner during the pandemic, and they are actually playing out the anti-vaxxer movement. I wouldn't really think that or consider Facebook as the biggest actor. I think that Facebook is the biggest platform that can be used both for the benefit of ourselves or in another way. I don't think that Facebook is the bigger problem, because Solvita asked about research and also about whether people want this high-quality information. They are ready to pay. No, readiness to pay is a different issue. But generally, the public wants to have high-quality information, especially during the crisis. And people are looking for answers to questions, also in different sources, not only in trustworthy sources. But this doesn't really mean they're ready to pay. The question is just about how to have financing for this high-quality content so that people would get it, and how we use this financing for producing better content. And now here we should again go back and look at what public money is spent on in the media fund. And once again, I would like to say that public money should go for creating quality, high-quality content. And the main thing is also what content the public wants to use and how do we help them as media.
Ethics is also a part of reputation. You have to abide by the media ethics principles because your reputation depends on that. I would like to understand your future expectations. What do you expect in during the next 5 years? What do you expect to see? Media will be more on the reputation side, small media will die out and Facebook will continue, will survive, or something else. What do you expect to see during the next 5 years, and what role will play such self-organization bodies as a Media Ethics Council? Ivor, maybe you could be the first. I'm happy that Dombors is back in Delphi. That already contributes. I think he's partially back. What else? I can just tell about myself. I think very critically review everything that is received. And we also have a portal. And also to tell to those who work in the portal, why, let's say, one opinion is published and there are no other opinions, why Julijs Krūviņš just tells that he is waiting for Sputnik vaccine, why didn't you put Olga Dredi there, who wants to get vaccinated? This is what concerns my publishing house. Yeah, so let's say internal standards. Sometimes colleagues maybe don't even think why they publish one or the other article. Yeah, our internal standards, I believe. Solvita, a few comments about what was said before. You mentioned these special projects, educational projects for men and algorithms and so on. I would like to mention that it is very needed to speak with women, in particular women who have spent the last 2 years just with children and whose main source of information was just their husbands. And the news fatigue goes hand in hand together with immature decision-making, since women have decided that they will deal just with children and men will deliver the news. And now about the dialogue that was mentioned by Martin. Of course, we can speak about various categories, so I'm opposed to generalization. But we have audiences that mostly consume media digitally and those who consume them in an analogous manner. And then there are hybrid audiences. And if we look at how these audiences perceive dialogues, communication, the analog audiences, of course, they have a dialogue. In the digital environment, we don't have a dialogue, we have a polylogue. You mentioned Facebook as one of the threats, but I would like to underline that of late, Facebook, and not maybe of late, but for many years, they have specific regulations. And due to these regulations, we see that the most radical audiences look for other platforms. And it will be much more difficult to deal with these platforms than with Facebook. We will not be able to study what is there. We will not be able to study what is there in Latvian. because our language is small, and that will be also a research problem, and we have to work with these new tools. But what concerns your question about our future in 5 years, here I would like to refer to one Canadian researcher who claims that slowly, but we have already entered the post-journalism era, that namely it is worth reviewing the idea of media, because we speak about media and at the same time we speak only about journalism. And if we look at what can affect people's minds, who can affect people's minds, who are the influence agents, factors, then let's say there are also artists. And if we look at the notion of media, then this notion is much wider. I think the pandemics will be like a catalyst for various changes, and we will have to review our business models, also what we do, and maybe have a separate communication with women and with men and with children. Yuri? I think the topics are quite extensive. On the one hand, we speak about platforms and media discussions with society, and we also look into the future. First, Mr. Pastalnieks, yes, you are right, Facebook has earned more, but I do not believe it's just because of the fake news and disinformation. Netflix has also increased its profits dramatically. As soon as the pandemic started, I think during the second quarter of 2020, they secured 16 million more subscribers. And I think due to the isolation and lockdown, I think all platforms have increased their revenue and the number of users. And I think that the disinformation is not really so relevant what concerns Facebook, because it's a global phenomenon. I think it provides a certain direction for the future. I think we can say goodbye to the traditional TV. The truth can be found in these platforms, but then there is a question to what extent these platforms will produce news in our current understanding of this notion. I think the audience quite easily determines its choices, and mostly it's entertainment, but eventually we will have to pay for the paid content, and there'll be more and more of these platforms in the market. But at the same time, probably we'll have the so-called stadium group, stadium band effect. There'll be stars, and there'll be those who will pay without any money, play without any money in the garage, and the winners will take it all, and the rest will have to somehow survive, and then they will work with clicks and other dubious sources to attract the attention of the audience. And I think that the platforms will be consolidated, there'll be technical solutions that journalists will be able to use. I think it's already consolidated, said the other panelist. But the speaker continues saying that there'll be platforms that will offer the content, and users will be able to vote with their money. And I would like to disagree with Ms. Lidaka, who said that the people don't pay for the content. Yeah, they pay, but in a different way. Let's say if we look at how much they pay for Spotify, Netflix, TED TV, and so on, and if we review this list, and if we look at the charge that one of the local platforms, monthly charge that one of the local platforms has, I think there is no way to avoid this. People will buy this content as they used to buy DNA 15 years ago. If we continue this topic, we have to ask for which money Domburs returned to Delphi. because I have to claim that the Media Foundation money is also payment for the content. What concerns media literacy, I think it will be greatly affected by the following. Of course, the future is in social media and technological solutions and so on, but journalism or opinion leaders, they will stay. They'll be either journalists or other opinion leaders, trustworthy sources of information that we have to really take care of, because it's needed by our society, really needed by our society. And here I would like to speak about journalism as a profession, about professional standards and criteria, so that all of them would be implemented, because this will result in public trust. But if we speak about public opinion leaders, there will be new communication forms. But I would like to believe, and Mr. President already mentioned at the beginning of this event about trustworthy media. I do not believe that they will die in the nearest future. Of course, linear TV is dead, no one doubts that, but the content will continue, it will be developed, it will be created by journalists or opinion leaders, and we have to think how to create this communication with society so that we can continue to exist as a state. And we really have to speak about the role of media every single day, because it's very important for our continued existence as a state. That's why I would like to think that it will not disappear in the nearest future. Of course, the forms will change, how we communicate, technological solutions and so on, but the message, the necessity for these messages will remain, and we have to think what messages we will give. There were several ideas provided about consolidation, uniform standards, professional standards that apply to everyone in this area. If we look critically at the Latvian media environment and its ability to cooperate, because if we want to achieve whatever we just discussed, we need to be able to cooperate. This event is a testimony to that, because competing media stream this event. But what are the other fora where Latvian media can strengthen each other, maybe use our potential to the fullest? And the President also has claimed that we have this isolatory thinking, that we just stick to our ideas and that's it. Maybe we can do something here. Gunta, maybe you could be the first. We have really discussed quite a lot the media crisis in Latvia, and not only in Latvia, and I can tell that I was really positively surprised that after these many years, for 11 years I represented commercial media in the media organization, umbrella media organization of Latvia. And I was really surprised that finally the President has started speaking about comprehensive support to both types of media. Finally, I have this hope. I have always spoken about this in all formats possible, namely about the ability of the Latvian media organization to cooperate just for one single reason, because we are small, we have a small market, and we face global challenges. As Mr. Pastalnieks already mentioned, like Facebook, Google, and others, about the digital taxes and so on, we have to learn to cooperate just because we are a very small market that has specific purposes in this media space, in addition to business. So I would like to claim the business side will become much more difficult in the future. But we have to understand that there is nothing to compete anymore. That is nothing to compete for anymore. We have global challenges. We have to work on public unity, on the existence of our state, on the continued existence of democracy. First, It's not like that the media cannot really agree, because our ethics council is a testimony to that. Media have agreed that we need this organization, and it was established, and we were part of this process. And I can safely claim that, yes, this is one of the examples that demonstrates that media can agree. There are also simpler, more technical solutions. I know that Delphi management is actively working on a single platform that would allow smaller media to provide paywall services, because you need quite a lot of knowledge and technological investment to set up this system, and you cannot just do it if you are small. But I would also like to note that sometimes media have to agree about specific standards, what we say and how we say, and what we do not say. Like we agreed maybe about specific standards in comments, let's say in Delphi, it was a long time ago. And slightly later, we also had an agreement about the following. Let's say if someone calls to a shopping center and says that there is a bomb there, we never say that there is a bomb. We just say that there is an emergency situation, just to prevent them from gaining publicity. And these are the agreements that are already in place, but we can agree about many other things. This is not a rocket science. This is something that needs to be done on a daily basis, and it is done on a daily basis. We have to agree about standards and implement them, because there are organizations, and there are varied organizations. Of course, some could be better, in better shape. But I don't believe that we are in total crisis. Everyone is doing whatever they are supposed to do and doing quite well. Solvita. Martin. From the strategic communication point of view, I think you have quite a lot to say about resistance, resilience. And in this regard, we speak about vulnerabilities, but to start the process to go further, we have to speak about our strengths, where we do great. And speaking about our media, I would like to remind about a very sad event that took place in Latvia, namely the Zolitude tragedy, after which we as TV channels could agree. We worked together, we shared information, we shared interviews, and we could borrow batteries and cables from our colleagues. I think this individualistic thinking maybe is also a part of our strengths, because we know whom to contact to get the information right away, and that also applies to research activities. We have outstanding researchers. We have researchers who cooperate with universities, and we have really good products that can be used in Latvia and that we can demonstrate elsewhere, and that allow us to secure future cooperation possibilities. And I would like to pull the blanket towards science as well, because you have to educate journalists as well. You have to speak with communicators. I would also like to act as a devil's advocate in a way. We just heard some negative opinions about government communicators, that they were not really doing their job. I remember myself a year ago, in August, I was in Latvia. I conducted a study, quite a large project, the Baltic Disinformation Index, and I carried out in-depth interviews. I spoke with Daga Homa, and her body was quite small at that time. And it was a joke, but it was a sad joke, and she said the strategic communications center at the government is she and another person and half a person. So, you know, this criticism that is quite loud, but then we have to ask whether they have the human resources. Everyone has his or her job to do, and we try to educate these human resources, we try to engage them, we try to share our knowledge, we have to study the public and improve this environment. So maybe we should also look for our strengths that we can highlight, that we can improve even further, and maybe we should focus on our strengths.
Speaking about journalists and how united they are, certainly journalists also have their political groupings, and Pādars has his own organization. There is the Journalist Association, which is a mass organization. There are also many journalists, also Russian-speaking journalists, who stand outside the process. I think this is a big problem. We don't have a single journalistic force in the country, and we have many journalists who stand outside, and nobody ever will get the journalistic award from our paper Neatkarīgā avīze, and we have to think about this so that journalism would be seen as one single spectrum. If we had one single strong organization, I think that we would also act differently during this pandemic. We would defend our interests, we would protect them, and we would have also a trade union, perhaps. I think this is what I see towards the future. And when I speak to my colleagues in other countries about what the difference is here and there, I think that they always say that Latvia really has a gap in scientific journalistics. Latvia has all this esoteric journalism, and this is maybe why they don't vaccinate people, don't vaccinate here. So if everyone goes and works on their own platform, then the question is, who is going to, where are we going to develop things? I think this is a very interesting thing, that on all the scientific projects, we always have some financing for communications, because indeed there are places where to speak about these things, the platforms. We have, of course, to follow our audiences in there and take into account their behavior when using using content. But the question is indeed whether we could have one single journalist association. The question with this is that we always have a very close link between journalists and the authorities, the politics and the government, and politics, actually. And this is why it would be quite difficult to have one single association. I would say that at this moment the degree of politicization is quite high, is too high. I think we have to finalize this. We had a lot of views and contradictions also. Our own colleagues are following us on the media. Now, what would be your recommendations to the editors, to the editorial boards? What should they do? What should they implement from today on to make things better? Maybe some easier things, some things that might be more difficult. What would be the advice you would give them in a free form? Just anyone speaks out. I think that you have to behave in a healthy way towards criticism. So promotion of critical discussion and analysis of processes in their own homes, look at themselves from the side, that will promote growth. I think that you should have this one question in your pocket what should take the media out of their comfort zone and would keep them from sweeping things under the table. Also informing people with things that maybe are not in line with the official view. But in doing so, wouldn't be afraid to make mistakes, because those who don't make mistakes, they don't do nothing. But if you see a mistake has been made, you have to correct it in a visible way. And another thing, as we go on with what was said, if you think about diversity of views, whether you correct mistakes or do fact-checking as a genre, you should avoid toxic fact-checking, which might be very detrimental. What is toxic fact-checking? I think this is when there is an article, and when the title of the article replicates a myth, and then there is going to be there will be some clarification that they are not going to disinfect the city, but there will still be this title. Or when there is some information about Latvia, probably misinformation, or maybe part of an informational operation or activity, when the algorithm is going to find, but the target audience is would in no way actually travel to Latvia if some media would not efficiently correct the mistake. I would like to wish this for myself and also other people, not to somehow have a bad feeling or towards the people who don't think like you. And I think that we should have a media council where we would be able to write critical things about different journalists from different parts of the spectrum. And then in the council we could resolve these things. I would like to thank all the speakers. We had Aivars Pastalnieks, Solvita Denisa Liepnica, Gunta Līdaka, Juris Menziņš, and it was very interesting. Many people watched us in the media. Also, the Media Ethics Month has completed this, or is coming to a close this month. But if you need materials about media ethics and quality information, it is also available in the Media Ethic web page. And we specifically invite professors from universities to visit our web page. It is an excellent source for good information. And we also would like to thank everyone who took part in organizing this Media Ethics Month, the Ministry of Culture and the media who have been engaging with us, who have devoted their work hours and their resources to bring that message further. Also, the technical personnel, the translators, the interpreters, and all the other people who have been involved. And we are continuing to speak about this, and in the next month's media Ethics Month and also information related to it. Thank you.